welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the legendary curse of King Tutankhamun. We're going to separate historical fact from a completely wild 1920s media frenzy. Honestly, it's a story that proves fake news definitely isn't just a modern invention. We'll be looking at how a remarkably intact tomb sparked an absolute global obsession, and how the media back then crafted a narrative so powerful we're literally still talking about it today. Let's get into it. So picture this. It's a completely cinematic, almost unbelievable scene. You've got a sealed doorway that's been safely hidden beneath the shifting sands of Egypt for over 3,000 years. Behind it, a royal tomb, completely undisturbed, just waiting in the pitch black. When that seal was finally broken, it prompted a chilling question that captivated the entire world. Did the people who walked into that tomb unleash an ancient curse? Well, to answer that, we need to look at the cold, hard facts. Section 1. The boy king Tutankhamun. Let's step back for a second to the 14th century BCE. This is during the mighty 18th dynasty, and Tutankhamun comes to power at a remarkably young age. Now, he wasn't ancient Egypt's most powerful ruler by any stretch, but his reign was incredibly significant. Why? Because it came right after the Amarna period, which was a time of massive religious upheaval. This young pharaoh actually restored traditional Egyptian religious practices. He brought back the old gods before his sudden early death. Historically speaking, though, it's his almost perfectly intact tomb that completely transformed his place in history, turning a relatively minor king into an absolute household name. Section 2. Unearthing the golden treasure. All right, it's November 1922. After years of basically just moving sand around and finding nothing but empty rock, British archaeologist Howard Carter and his wealthy sponsor, Lord Carnarvon, finally hit the jackpot. They uncovered something extraordinary, the untouched entrance to the tomb. You can almost feel the suspense of that exact moment, right? Carter is standing there before the sealed doorway, facing intense pressure after years of setbacks. He chips away a tiny hole, holds up a candle, and peers into the darkness to see what's been hiding there for millennia. And the staggering scale of the treasures they found inside? Honestly, totally unexaggerated. We're not just talking about a couple of broken pots here. They found the iconic golden burial mask, perfectly preserved royal coffins, entire disassembled chariots, weapons, intricate jewelry, beautifully carved statues, plus everyday objects and ritual furniture. The sheer volume and the pristine condition of these items were completely unprecedented. It was a real game changer. This discovery instantly transformed our understanding of ancient Egyptian life and death, completely cementing this minor king as a cornerstone of Egyptianology. Section 3. Whispers of a Curse. Now, it is true that ancient Egyptians believed in protective magic, tomb guardians, and fiercely protecting the dead in the afterlife. But newspapers around the world completely hijacked that reality with this chilling warning. Death shall come on swift wings to those who disturb the peace of the king. The media spread this legend globally like wildfire. They claimed with absolute certainty that this terrifying threat was inscribed directly on the tomb to ward off grave robbers. I mean, it was the perfect dramatic hook for newspapers just looking to sell copies. But here is the crucial truth, the real reality check. While journalists fueled a massive worldwide panic to sell papers by cooking up this irresistible supernatural mystery, the archaeological reality was entirely different. Experts have confirmed there is absolutely zero reliable evidence that this exact inscription ever existed anywhere on or in Tutankhamun's tomb. That whole swift wings of death thing, a complete 100% modern invention. It was just a heavy layer of 1920s media sensationalism plastered right over ancient stone. Section 4. The first victim? Okay, so just months after the tomb opened in 1923, Lord Carnarvon, the guy who funded the whole expedition, passes away. Now, his death was the result of a real, historically documented illness, brought on by an infected mosquito bite. There was absolutely zero supernatural causation involved. But hey, a mosquito bite doesn't exactly sell out the morning edition, right? The press completely ignored the medical facts and immediately declared that the pharaoh had taken his revenge. Lord Carnarvon wasn't presented as a man who sadly succumbed to an infection. Oh no, he was the first official victim of King Tutankhamun. This right here is the ultimate case study in media sensationalism, sacrificing accuracy for shocking stories just to provoke public interest. Journalists were in an absolute frenzy. They were desperately searching for mysterious connections to literally anyone even vaguely involved in the excavation. A random power outage in Cairo must be the curse. A dog howling back in England? Oh, definitely the curse. The media prioritized shocking language at the total expense of reality, single-handedly turning an incredible archaeological triumph into a global horror movie. Section 5. fact, fiction, and coincidence. Eventually, the legend actually grew bigger than the archaeology itself. People weren't talking about the golden mask or the chariots anymore. They just wanted to know who was going to drop dead next. But we really have to ask ourselves, how many of these so-called cursed deaths were actually unusual? Think about it. When dozens of people work on a massive, multi-year project in a foreign climate, statistically speaking, some of them are going to fall ill or pass away. But human psychology, we just desperately want to connect the dots, don't we? And the sensationalist media was more than happy to convince everyone that a 3,000-year-old mummy was systematically taking revenge. But what happens when researchers finally look at the hard data? The modern legend of these sudden, mysterious deaths completely falls apart. The actual historical truth is that many individuals connected to the discovery, the excavation, and the clearing of the tomb lived for years and even decades after walking into that burial chamber. Take Howard Carter, for example. He is the very man who first breached the seal and spent the most time surrounded by the Pharaoh's artifacts. He lived for another 17 years after the discovery. The curse story, when you actually hold it up to scientific and historical scrutiny, it simply doesn't hold water. So as we wrap up this explainer, the line between ancient history and a 1920s media frenzy is brilliantly clear. We've seen firsthand how sensationalism easily overwrote the truth in the public's memory. So I leave you with this to ponder. If a totally fabricated story about a 3,000-year-old mummy could so easily trick the entire globe a century ago, what modern myths are we falling for today? All right, let's jump right into this explainer and investigate what is arguably the most famous archaeological legend in human history. We're talking, of course, about the legendary curse of King Tutankhamun. Now, you probably already know the basics. The discovery of this tomb literally sent shockwaves around the globe. But alongside the gold and the artifacts, this darker, much more sinister story emerged from the Egyptian sands. Today, we're going to dig into the source material to separate the cold, hard historical facts from decades of, well, sensationalized storytelling. So, did a 3,000-year-old pharaoh actually seek revenge? By the time the world even started whispering about Tutankhamun's curse, the story had already totally escaped the tomb. The idea of a cursed king punishing anyone who dared disturb his eternal rest, it captured the public's imagination almost overnight. But did this ancient ruler truly strike back from beyond the grave? Was there some tangible supernatural force at play here? Or is there a much more rational explanation for everything that went down after the tomb was opened? Well, to figure that out, we have to look at how the information was actually handled back in the day. Which brings us to part 1. The legend escapes the tomb, moving from history to supernatural mystery. We're going to see how a monumental historical discovery in the 1920s was almost instantly transformed by newspapers into this global supernatural monster. Let's head into part 2, Carnarvon and the media frenzy. Because to really understand this myth, we absolutely have to investigate the prime suspect at the very center of it all, Lord Carnarvon. Let's walk through the timeline of events here, starting in late 1922 when this magnificent tomb is first discovered. Fast forward just a bit to early 1923, and Lord Carnarvon gets a simple, everyday mosquito bite. But then, by the spring of that year, things take a turn. That bite becomes severely infected, leading to some pretty serious complications. And ultimately, in April 1923, he tragically dies from pneumonia. Now, his death felt extraordinary to everyone simply because it happened just months after the tomb opened. It honestly felt like cosmic retribution, right? But as any historian or scientist will quickly tell you, timing alone does not equal causation. There is a massive disconnect here between the terrifying newspaper headlines, which, let's be honest, were just designed to sell copies, and the completely mundane, documented medical realities of Carnarvon's illness. Remember, newspapers in the 1920s were locked in this fierce, cutthroat competition for readers. So we've got mysterious Egypt, ancient tombs, priceless treasure, a young pharaoh, and a sudden death. I mean, those are the absolutely perfect ingredients for a sensationalized global legend. The media essentially built a monster out of thin air, totally ignoring the basic fact that Lord Carnarvon's death was actually just the result of a standard, albeit tragic, infection. But the media didn't create this perfect storm entirely on their own. They had help from some incredibly prominent public figures who enthusiastically fanned the flames of these supernatural theories. When someone as famous and respected as Arthur Conan Doyle, the literal creator of Sherlock Holmes, comes out and publicly supports the idea of an ancient curse, well, people listen. The curse got firmly baked into popular culture, even though the actual archaeological evidence at the site showed absolutely nothing magical or supernatural whatsoever. It was a complete cultural and media phenomenon, entirely unsupported by the physical reality on the ground. So, part 3,
Ancient spells and modern science, the alibi. Because if it wasn't some Hollywood-style magical spells striking people down left and right, could it have been, say, a biological hazard? When we look at the reality of ancient Egyptian protective texts, sure, we actually do find warnings. But these texts were strictly about maintaining ritual order. Their whole purpose was protecting the dead, preventing the desecration of the bodies, and warning people against disturbing sacred, ordered spaces. It's so vital to understand that this does not mean ancient Egyptians somehow bioengineered a supernatural disease or a magical force field that automatically killed tomb robbers. The modern idea of the Tutankhamun curse is entirely disconnected from the actual religious texts left behind by the people who built the tomb. Over the years, folks looking for a more rational angle have pointed to natural hazards, right? Things like fungi, mold, bacteria, poor ventilation, and ancient dust. And hey, it is absolutely true that ancient sealed tombs can contain biological and environmental hazards. They can definitely exacerbate pre-existing medical conditions or trigger respiratory infections. But here is the kicker. Medical researchers and scientists have never conclusively found a specific pathogen responsible for the famous deaths associated with this particular discovery. The supernatural claims, still unsupported. And those sensational medical claims of some deadly ancient superbug, they lack any conclusive scientific proof, too. So, if there was no magical spell and no killer mold, why on earth did so many people believe in it? That brings us to part 4, the confirmation bias trap, the accomplices. It really comes down to human psychology. This is a statistical problem at the very heart of the legend, confirmation bias in action. Think about it. If you have a large group of people connected to an excavation over many, many years, basic statistics pretty much dictate that some of them will naturally pass away from illness, tragic accidents, or just old age. A cluster of deaths only looks mysterious when you're looking at it selectively. People basically cherry-picked the few who died, retroactively blamed the so-called curse because it fit a thrilling narrative, and completely, totally ignored the dozens of workers, scientists, and officials who went on to live long, healthy lives.
But the ultimate nail in the coffin for this myth really lies with one man, Howard Carter. This is the guy who discovered the tomb. He literally physically opened the sealed doorway, spent the most time inside breathing in that ancient air, and meticulously cleared the burial chamber. If there was any kind of supernatural curse or deadly ancient pathogen, Howard Carter absolutely should have been the very first to fall. Instead, he continued his archaeological career for decades and died of natural causes in 1939. That is a full 17 years after opening the tomb. Honestly, his survival alone definitively proves the media's narrative was just a massive case of confirmation bias.
Which leads us to part 5, the real Tutankhamun mystery, the reveal. It's time to step away from the sensationalized fiction for a minute, because modern archaeology has produced some genuinely awe-inspiring discoveries without needing any supernatural explanation whatsoever. What Howard Carter and his team actually gave the world was this unprecedented look directly into the past. I mean, they found an unexpectedly preserved tomb just bursting with extraordinary, priceless treasures. We gained incredible clues about ancient Egyptian royal life, and we got to see firsthand the masterful, totally unparalleled Egyptian craftsmanship of that era. And even more recently, scientific studies of the mummy have given us mind-blowing insights into the young pharaoh's health, his lineage, and his family history. We actually learned about a real human being, a young king whose life was suddenly cut short. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to take a second and imagine that silent, sealed tomb just sitting hidden beneath the desert sands right before Howard Carter's discovery. The true power of what we've unpacked today is realizing that the real treasure wasn't some magic spell. It was the extraordinary survival of a piece of the ancient world that waited patiently for over 3,000 years to be found. The source material brings us to a pretty powerful conclusion. Perhaps Tutankhamun never cursed the people who opened his tomb at all. Perhaps the real curse was simply the power of a great story, a story of gold, death, mystery, and a forgotten king whose tomb changed archaeology forever. The curse itself might be complete fiction, but the mystery of Tutankhamun is very, very real. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a 1920s media frenzy could convince the entire world of a magical curse, what modern myths are we blindly accepting as fact today? Until next time, keep questioning history.